When we removed the pool structure behind our house to build the shop, I had them save the glulam beams that used to be the roof structure for the pool structure. They were about 30 feet long and 18 by 5 inches in dimension. They sort of threw them over in the mud. I had to drag them out and save them. They've been next to the door of the shop, sort of as steps into the shop, which worked pretty well, but they're kind of big and they take up a lot of space there. And if I want to move anything big in or out of the shop, they were sort of in the way. So they got moved last fall, and they've been sitting up against the side of the house. So what I need now, because I don't have them in the shop, is I need some stairs down into the shop. So I thought I could use these beams for that. So that the thing I want to do is to make 2 sort of really heavy sides with the pieces of beams and then treads between the 2 sides. And the thought with this design is that the piece will work both as stairs but also as a platform for bringing things in and out of the shop. I cut up 1.5 of the beams next to the house. That was a lot easier than bringing the beams in to the shop and then cutting them up, as I would have just used the circular saw in the shop. Doing it with a circular saw, they're 5 inches thick and the saw cuts 2¼ inches deep. So I had to cut both sides and then cut the center between the 2 cuts with my Sawzall, which meant cutting one side and then flipping the beam over and cutting the other side. And it's just about the biggest thing I can move. And the cut on each side had to be lined up really well so that the long, thin blade of the Sawzall would go between the 2 cuts from the circular saw. And it worked. It got a little jumpy at points. Now these smaller pieces can be taken in to the shop. And my ramp that I've been using for a long time to get in and out. These still had some dirt on them from sitting outside, so I wiped them down. I didn't want to dull the planer blade on dirt. Then I checked them for nails, and I found a couple, and I found one that was big and really hard to get out. It was at the end of one of the beams. And the head was in all the way, and the tip was just sticking out on the side, so it was really hard to get to. So it took a while to get out. But with the right leverage, it worked. Since my planer will do 18 inches and the beams are 18 inches wide, I wanted to joint them down just a little bit so that they'd fit in the planer. So I did that. And you could start to see that the wood was going to be really beautiful. So I started with one at the planer. And I guess I haven't done a wide board through the planer in a while because I set it to the height, but it wouldn't take it. And I just had to do a lot of pushing and pulling to get it to go through the planer. So I thought about it for a little bit and got inside.
So what I thought I needed to do was possibly adjust the infeed roller down just a little bit. I think it's a hair too high and it's not grabbing the piece of wood as it goes through well enough. Great.
You can see my studio lighting in here. So both sides are now set evenly.
Yeah.
So it was about half a turn on the adjustment screw on the height of the infeed roller. And then that seemed to make it work perfectly. Then I cleaned up one end on the table saw, which I could just cut this thickness on the table saw. I then screwed a stop down to the table so that my 3 pieces would be the same length. And I cut the other side. I clamped the piece to the miter gauge so that it wouldn't move around, and that actually worked well. So the piece that I was holding on to was safe with the blade this high, but the piece that's getting cut off I wasn't holding on to. And I made sure that I wasn't standing in line with the piece that was getting cut off, because that wasn't being held, and it tended to move a little bit from the blade. And it could move a lot if it wanted to, so it's good not to stand in line with that, because you'll get hit by it. Then a quick pass on the joiner. And to make the two sides for the stair, I needed to glue together one mostly full height piece and then one that was about a half of a full height piece to get a really thick piece. I thought about doing a key or sort of some kind of joint where I'm gluing it together, but there really wasn't any reason to make the joint that I was making any stronger than the rest of the beam. Now for the treads, I wanted to get the 3 treads that I needed out of one of the pieces that I'd cut. So what I did was to cut off 1/4 of it, and then the wider side I could cut in half vertically and get 2 treads. And then the smaller piece I could cut in half and then glue those 2 halves together to get the 3rd tread. So I trimmed them to length at this point. So I cut the wider piece in half and got 2 treads out of it. And then the smaller piece I cut in half. Then I could glue the 2 smaller pieces together to make a tread. I used biscuits just to hold the joint together while it was drying, so that it would stay aligned in the clamps. With my scheme to get 3 treads out of my piece of beam, I was ending up with treads that were a little bit less than a foot, which is what I was shooting for on the stair. And a second thing I was beginning to realize, with all of these parallel pieces of wood on the stairs, it would be hard to see the nose of the stair. So I added a piece to the tread to give it the width, but also to change the color of the tread so that you'd see where the step is in the stair. And I replaned the treads, and the treads were done. Now the way that I wanted to attach the treads to the sides was to cut a mortise into the side pieces and then have the tread just go into that mortise. So it would be like the tread was just a big tenon. I made a little jig for the router so that I could cut out that mortise in the sides. So I cut out 4 pieces for the 4 different sides of the rectangle that I needed. And I screwed them together. I was thinking I would glue it together, but then that was going to mean that it would have to sit overnight and dry. So I thought it would be quicker if I just used screws. And it works, but you need to be careful the last bit of the screw so that it doesn't break the plywood apart. Now to figure out where the treads go on the sides, I can draw a line from the upper corner down to the nose of the bottom tread, and that connects all of the tops of the noses of the treads. So I can figure out where the nose of the bottom tread is by just putting that tread where I want to put it. And I can mark that. And now I can draw that same line that I had on the piece of paper from this corner down to that mark at the nose of the bottom tread. I can draw a light line, and then it's just a matter of dividing that line into thirds, and it's 42 inches, which makes it really easy. So it's 14, and then 28, and then the last one's 42. So the noses to the treads are here, there, and there. Once I've drawn that, I can then lay out the treads to see if I'm right with my marks. And it seemed to be good. I can clamp my jig down to the side, and then I can route out the hole from the jig. I don't have a plunge router base, so I kind of put the router down on one side and then slowly ease the bit into the wood. I did the perimeter first, and then I did the center. And I took 3 passes for the depth of 1 inch. I made a lot of dust. And I had to do some and then stop and then vacuum out the sawdust. So it was somewhat slow, but not too bad. and I did a little sanding. It got really dusty. This is actually dust on the lens of the camera. It's not actually this dusty in the air. Then I vacuumed out after each pass. Now back to the treads. I could now cut those all to the same length to fit my holes. Another place where I had two problems that I could solve with one solution was that the corners of the mortises that I had cut were rounded because of the router bit. And I could also round over the stairs, which would be sort of nice on the stair so that it's not so sharp. So I made that round over on the tread the same radius as the inside corner of the mortises so that the two fit together nicely. And I did a little sanding. Now I wanted to attach the sides and the treads with screws, or bolts I guess, and not use glue because I know at some point I'll want to take this apart. So I made a little jig on the drill press with the hole placement that I wanted to use, and this would help hold the bit vertical as it went into the side piece. So I drilled all of the holes, and then it was time to lay out the piece, or to put it together I guess. So I put the treads in. Then once they're in place, I clamped it tight together and then just put in all the bolts. I drilled a hole into the end of the tread and then put the bolt into that. And then the last thing to go on were the wheels, and it was just four holes and 4 bolts. One of the bolts I couldn't use my ratchet on, so I had to just use a wrench to get it on, which took a few minutes, but it worked. And then at this point, it's getting really heavy. It weighs more than I do, I'm sure. I locked the back wheels at this point because there's no way to tip something over like this when the wheels are moving and the piece is trying to run away from you. And it seems to be good and sturdy. It's time for some finish. I just have some wipe-on polyurethane for this. This is about the fastest finishing job I've done. It was really late and I just wanted to get it done. I just poured the finish on and then just wiped it around. And then it's time for it to go into place. And I finally have a stair into the shop. Thanks for watching.